we're back into testimony. And this whole issue, why don't we just pay him with cash, which was Donald Trump's approach to this. And Michael Cohen says we needed to acquire the information about the documents. And I believe that the proper way to do it would be by check to make it appear to be a proper transaction. Hoffinger, the tape cuts off and there is a voice. Whose voice is that? There was me. I was receiving an incoming phone call. Did the recording with Mr. Trump end? And he says he took the call because it was important, but mostly he'd gotten what he wanted. What he wanted was enough to show David Pecker that he would get his $150,000 back. I don't know, maybe the more important part of that is really about why do we need those documents? Because we wanted it to appear like a proper transaction.
That's critically important, and part of the reason why it's important is because Donald Trump's defense has always been, in part, I was following the advice of my lawyer. Michael Cohen is my lawyer. I have been asking him about fixing problems, ultimately. Michael Cohen was the fixer. I'm thinking ahead, if you will, in terms of how this all fits with respect to different arguments. We've established that Michael Cohen was the person who Donald Trump went to in order to solve problems and fix things. And so something like this, in terms of the difference between, hey, pay them cash, and then Michael Cohen says, oh, I don't think you should do that. I don't think that's a good idea. And then ultimately the check's coming out and it being a check that came from the White House inexplicably, it speaks to what Donald Trump has tried to advance from the very beginning, which is, I didn't conceive this scheme. This wasn't my idea. These were things that my attorney told me to do, so why would I know that they were illegal? And so the prosecution is going to have to continue to wade through this and deal with that, but then also refocus the jury on the notion that you were trying to make sure that the impact on the election was not what we knew it would be after Access Hollywood.
And Misty, did they just bolster the fact that this phone call was completely authentic, in that they just had Cohen address why the tape cut off at one point? And that's something, you know, earlier we saw the defense try to suggest there had been some kind of manipulation with the technology when the prosecution was admitting these records.
Yeah, and the other piece of it is, if I'm the defense attorney, I'm going to say, oh, convenient, you taped this one conversation, but all of these other conversations that you say took place where Donald Trump said X, Y, Z, they're not on tape? Why? Well, they've answered that question because they're saying, or Michael Cohen is saying, that this was taped for the specific purpose of confirming that a reimbursement would be made, not necessarily that every single conversation would be recorded for other reasons. So I think it serves to help the prosecution to anticipate the argument that the defense will raise.
They also have David Pecker's testimony, right? And he was done putting out six figures for Donald Trump. Yeah. He expected, you know, he got, yes, his front pages. He sold copies of the National Enquirer, but $150,000 was a bridge too far.
Yeah, I agree. And to Misty's point, like that, with focusing solely on the recording and saying, oh, well, it was messed with, or oh, it was tampered with, oh, we can't fully trust it, oh, and you cut it off at the right moment. It's a double-edged sword because at the end of the day, there's so much to corroborate everything that went on in that recording that it doesn't really serve the defense to really focus in as that being their sole defense.
So put on your defense hat. Is that a desperate move, or is it, let's throw darts, something's going to stick with one juror?
I think that it's your entire strategy from beginning to end of this case is throw as much at the jury as possible. Either you confuse them because you have bad facts and you can't rely on that, or ultimately you persuade one with what it is that they latch onto. So as many different theories that you can throw at the jury, some of which may actually even undercut each other, as crazy as that sounds. All you need is one. Chris, you said that in the last hour, and I think that it could not be more appropriate for our viewers to remember and to understand. If you're Donald Trump's defense team, you are not necessarily looking for an acquittal. You know that an acquittal here is highly unlikely. What you are hoping for is one holdout so that you can get yourself to a hung jury. And because of that, you don't know which of the legal theories you're thinking about is going to resonate most. So you're going to focus on all of them, and you're going to throw as many of them out because all you need is one. And if you get lucky, maybe you get two because one subscribes to one legal theory that, they think makes sense, and another one just subscribes to another. So now you've got them joining forces when it goes back to deliberations and they're refusing to convict. That's your strategy as the defense. You're trying to go in as many directions as possible, again, because if you get one, great. And if you don't, the confusion potentially creates some reasonable doubt that may not have otherwise existed, and you still arrive at the same place.
And they're, again, trying to eliminate any doubt about the authenticity of this recording. There's a few follow-up questions related to that. Hoffinger says, was there any real reason to have any further conversation with Mr. Trump about this at that time? Cohen says no. They insert some phone metadata. Hoffinger, did you alter that recording? Cohen, no. Hoffinger, is it exactly the same as September 6, 2016? Cohen says yes. And now they're turning the conversation to a little bit of conversation with Alan Weisselberg and what his typical communications would be with Alan Weisselberg. One of the things that I'm waiting for them to bring up is Michael Cohen's criminal history, right? And he has criminal history that's related to this case. He went to prison for campaign finance violations related to the Stormy Daniels payments. So how do you think the prosecution is going to address that, Kristen?
They could do it chronologically, right? I really hope that they don't do it before the lunch hour, because I don't think that it's appropriate for the jury to take that back and kind of be focusing in on his criminal history. But I think if they do it chronologically, which will require them to get out the Stormy Daniels, and then show the shift once Trump was then put into the White House and Cohen was left out of his cabinet. That's when Cohen began to get upset. And then they can kind of outline that, hopefully in the afternoon, after they've really delved into the Stormy Daniels, corroborated it with the documentary evidence. Then they can put in the criminal record, front some of the bad facts with regard to Cohen and why he may have a motive to really want to disparage and make sure that Trump pays for not putting him in the cabinet, and then, go off on a high note. That's what I'm hoping.
I'm going to go back into the document because Susan Hoffinger is asking Michael Cohen whether it was typical for him to discuss financial matters with Alan Weisselberg, who, again, was the chief financial officer for Trump Org. He is now at Rikers Island. And Michael Cohen says it was typical for everyone to discuss financial matters with Alan Weisselberg because he was the chief financial officer. And it's also because Mr. Trump directed me to speak to Mr. Weisselberg. Did Alan Weisselberg report directly to Donald Trump? And the answer is yes. But from a defense point of view, is it a leap to say that necessarily, or is it common sense to say necessarily, that Weisselberg and Trump were essentially one and the same? The right hand knew what the left hand was doing.
Right. So there's a two-way to see that argument. On one, you got to keep Trump involved, right, from a prosecutor's perspective. From a defense perspective, well, yeah, he's going to be speaking to the CEO or CFO about financial transactions, but he's also going to rely upon the advice of the CFO. From Donald Trump's position, from his defense team. So that's where they're going to go with that front, which is why this recording, the reason in my mind why the recording matters so much to the prosecutors is because Cohen says, we want to make this transaction appear to be legitimate. Yeah. And so that's really key because remember, and this is really important, the non-disclosure agreements themselves, CD, yeah, not illegal. So they have to have an intention while catching and killing and bolstering these other stories. They have to believe, Michael Cohen, the conspirators, Donald Trump, that they are potentially breaking the law, that they falsified these documents with the intent to break another law. In order to do so, that statement, this has to appear as legitimate. That's incredibly helpful to further that narrative. So absolutely the involvement of the CFO, I'm not sure that really wins the day either way. I don't think anybody would be surprised that the CFO would be involved in financial transactions. But for the defense, you're really going to say, I'm going to rely upon what the CFO tells me to do.
One key just portion of what he just said that stands out to me is, I did it because Mr. Trump directed me to speak with Mr. Weisselberg. That language, Mr. Trump directed me, Charles, is key.
Of course it is. I think that that's the picture that Michael Cohen has to paint in order to tie Donald Trump in, the more you establish that testimony that, number one, Donald Trump was someone who was a micromanager of his own business. He knew everything that was going on. He was somebody who took great interest in that. That's also why the Karen McDougal story is also appropriate, because it establishes a pattern of behavior in terms of how Donald Trump handled these things. You have to connect him as much as you can to Michael Cohen's actions, because part of the narrative that they're going to be fighting against is that Michael Cohen took these steps and did these things on his own. It still doesn't establish that Donald Trump necessarily knew that what he was doing was illegal, number one, or that he told him to classify it as legal reimbursements ultimately in the ledger. You still have to get to that point. We still haven't gotten any testimony around impact around the election and the fact that Donald Trump may have had this on his mind after the Access Hollywood tape was released. So there's still a lot that the prosecution has to do. But that type of language, I expect to hear more and more from Michael Cohen. I did this at the behest and instruction of Donald Trump, at the direction of Donald Trump.
Can you describe the conversation with Alan Weisselberg about the Karen McDougal agreement? I went to Alan's office and expressed to him we needed funding of $150,000 to consummate this transaction. And Alan said to me, quote, "If we do it from a Trump entity, that kind of defeats the purpose, because the point is not to have the Trump name affiliated with this at all. That would create a barrier."
And therein goes the intent and knowledge that there is a crime being committed. Because then, keep in mind, we have the ledger, we have the invoices, and we have the checks. And again, it's more of the pattern that's being established here, right? Because again, as Charles pointed out, we didn't get to the direct story yet, but him going to Weisselberg establishes that pattern of behavior. He had a history of going to Weisselberg to make sure that things were going to be structured appropriately, and he did it at the direction of Donald Trump. There's no reason to believe that Donald Trump wasn't fully aware of everything that was going on.
So
And he's
ultimately,
also-
this is setting up Stormy Daniels. This is why these things went in such a roundabout way, if you want to call it that, because we were very specifically trying to cover up the actual intent.
That's correct.
And he also, we know, set up a shell company in order to make that Stormy Daniels payment. And he's being asked in this situation what he did, right? What he did after that conversation with Alan Weisselberg, when Alan Weisselberg said, we don't want it connected to the Trump organization. Like he said, so he asked me to think of ways to come up with $150,000. So I told him I would come up with an LLC. How many conversations with Weisselberg about Karen McDougal transaction? He said 10, 12. That's Cohen's answer. Hoffinger, did there come a time you worked with Daniel Rothstein to transfer rights from AMI to an LLC? Cohen, he is an employee at AMI. Hoffinger, People's Exhibit 209 for identification. So she's now showing the jury this. And Cohen describes it as a communication from Rothstein to me over encrypted app Signal. So they use this encryption. And Hoffinger says, exact copy of the communication? Yes. And on this exhibit, it says it's from Daniel Rothstein to Michael Cohen. And it's written, please find possible names. I'm working on the assignment agreement. Hoffinger, was that just one day after you had taped the conversation with Mr. Trump about setting up an LLC? And Cohen says, yes. Hoffinger, you mentioned an assignment agreement. What's that? Cohen, he was referencing to assign the life rights of Karen McDougal to the LLC that was being created. That LLC, is that important?
Yeah, of course, because this all speaks to the overall plan of action of how they're going to record these payments. That's going to be integral when we're talking about the $420,000 that's really an issue and how it's broken down the way it is, why it's called what it is in the ledger. The why is really the important part. So now we know from this testimony, they want to keep it separate from the Trump organization. It defeats the purpose of paying the money if it's attached. Well, that might in itself might not be illegal, but the question is the why. Why do you want to keep it separate? Why are you calling it something different? Because the threshold issue is, are these falsified business records? So you have to prove that first. Then, was this in furtherance of another crime? And this is all speaking to what Michael Cohen, and this is going to be the challenging part for prosecutors, because he's going to have to say, well, we thought we might be breaking a law. We intended to falsify these records because we believed it could be violating campaign finance law or something of the like. So,
all right.
But it's really important just to point out, we still need prosecutors to connect Donald Trump to the actual actions that are taking place here. Donald Trump did not say, set up this LLC.
Alan Weisselberg and
Alan
Michael Cohen were discussing
It's important to remember that Michael Cohen's testimony has to be supported at some point to where did Donald Trump instruct you to do this specifically?
It's time for us to hand it over.